Hello, my name is Tiffany Bennett, and I am here today to discuss with you Carbon Zero. We are envisioning our future one tree at a time. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the current political environment of the United States is openly hostile towards the idea of climate change and any type of policy that would set limitations on the productivity of U.S. corporations in order to decrease global emissions and our carbon footprint. Therefore, we cannot rely on the federal government to implement guidelines that will secure the futures of children around the world. However, just because the current administration is in denial about the reality of climate change does not negate the fact that it is still wreaking havoc around the globe. The climate is changing, and with that comes a flood of climate refugees. For example, in Bangladesh, hundreds of thousands of people are routinely uprooted by coastal flooding, many making a treacherous journey to the slums of the capital, Dhaka. In West Africa, the almost total disappearance of Lake Chad because of desertification has empowered terrorists and forced more than 4 million people into camps. Here in the United States, it's also a problem. An estimated 2,300 Puerto Rican families displaced by Hurricane Maria are still looking for permanent housing, and government officials have spent years working to preemptively relocate more than a dozen small coastal communities in Alaska and Louisiana that are disappearing because of sea rise. It is now our responsibility as citizens of the world to activate change within the sectors that are most actively contributing to climate change. And just because the federal government does not want to take on this responsibility does not mean that Americans and America's largest corporations don't want to solve this problem. Welcome to Carbon Zero. Carbon Zero has two different components. There's a local level and an international level. For local businesses and corporations working solely within the U.S. or in a specific city or region, Carbon Zero would partner with corporations in planting trees, flower beds, and parks in low-income and poverty-stricken neighborhoods. The goal for the business is to become carbon neutral while creating urban development and renewal in the communities in which their employees live. Projects include parks such as D.H. Stanton Park in Atlanta, which is entirely energy neutral. They have installed photovoltaic solar panels that act as a shade structure at one of the park's entrances, which produces energy that is then sold back to Georgia Power, offsetting the entirety of the park's energy costs. There's also an example in the Old Fourth Ward Park here in Atlanta, which has created a 300-acre drainage basin using artistic elements to aerate and recycle pond water. The 2-acre stormwater detention pond has dramatically reduced flooding in nearby neighborhoods. The pond generates a minimum of 425 gallons a minute of water due to its elevation below the site's water table, and this water is used to water the park's lawns and playing fields. A 10-foot waterfall and a stone water cascade are used to aerate and recycle the pond water. Not only would this provide aesthetic benefits to the neighborhoods in which these projects are conducted, but research has shown how simple cosmetic changes to urban communities, such as planting flower beds, can help reduce violence. Carbon Zero would partner with corporations in working with local governing authorities like city planners, environmental agencies, and watershed management groups to build energy neutral and environmentally sustainable parks and green spaces. If, on the other hand, the business or corporation is international, then they may want to engage with reforestation on an international level. A recent study that was discussed in the Washington Post found that the countries with the most land available for building forests are Russia, China, Canada, Australia, Brazil, and the United States. They found that adding 1.2 trillion trees would reverse 10 years' worth of harmful emissions. In that study, the 1.2 trillion trees was published in Science magazine. Over the decades, those new trees would absorb about 200 billion tons of carbon from the atmosphere. Carbon Zero would work to find land where entire forests could be replanted, not only allowing for greater absorption of carbon and other pollutants, but also creating areas for new biodiversity to thrive. So the logistics of Carbon Zero. For all intents and purposes, Carbon Zero would mainly be a consulting firm that would show corporations how to implement this type of project. It would connect them with city planning committees and other government agencies, landscape architects, landscaping businesses, and then also provide them with a blueprint to implement a PR plan. The startup costs are relatively inexpensive. As a consulting firm, initially there would be no need for an office. As you can see, most of the startup cost is related to website development and branding. This is because these two components determine how the public emotionally interacts with your company, so it's critical to get this right. We would be getting funding through environmental grants and WeFunder. I chose WeFunder as my crowdsourcing platform because it allows people to invest in startups they love. Since this is for a specific cause, it would appeal to social activists, and it would encourage people to back founders solving the problems that they care about. In regards to financial sustainability, since this would be a consulting agency, the corporations that Carbon Zero would be working with would begin to pay for operational costs. I would like to see it self-sustainable within the first 3 years, but that entirely depends on how many companies we would attract. Every aspect of Carbon Zero hinges on the company or corporation understanding that climate change is a problem that needs to be solved. So if a company disagrees that climate change isn't occurring, it would be challenging to change their minds. Another challenge would be that if corporations don't see the PR benefit paying off, or if they are more concerned about their profit as opposed to benefiting society. An additional challenge would be in working with local governments who may not have policies developed to work with this type of project, especially in smaller towns and cities. They might not have something like this developed, so that would be a challenge. Factors for success are actually very similar to the previous slide. So mainly it hinges around the corporation's desires and wants. If they want to be an environmentally sustainable corporation and or increase their PR, their good PR, then this would be a good organization for them to partner with. If they want to create better neighborhoods and cities in the areas they work in and improve the quality of life for their employees, then Carbon Zero would be a great organization for them. It also depends on the community's needs. If the company is in a wealthier community and a more affluent community, then they may already have structures like this developed. They might not need more parks and more trees or anything like that. So that could present a little bit of a challenge and a detriment to the success of Carbon Zero if a corporation was in a wealthy neighborhood. Carbon Zero will quantify its success based off of 3 different factors. First, the number of relationships established with companies seeking to neutralize their carbon footprint. The number of trees planted. Since the recommendation is 1.2 trillion trees, that will be our ultimate goal. And then also the number of acres of green space developed. These 3 measurables will define how successful Carbon Zero is. So now it's up to you. We believe in a future where our children and grandchildren are not limited by a world with rising sea levels, catastrophic storms, and devastating famines, but are instead able to thrive within their own communities like the generations before them. Now it's up to you. Will you join us in changing the trajectory of the world?